The first thing I remember clearly is the jacket my father wore, navy linen with worn cuffs, too thin for the cold shine of the hospital corridor. He stood rigid by the window, hands deep in his pockets, watching the sun crawl across Avenida Almirante Rise. My mother sat beside me, clutching her purse so hard the tan leather squeaked, the tips of her fingers blotched pale and violet. The hospital air smelled too clean, too empty, antiseptic cutting through the warmth of old bodies and worry. I hadn't slept for almost a full day, and under the raft of fluorescent lighting, every sound was amplified. The shuffle of nurses' shoes, the rustle of paper as a doctor read a chart, my father's uneven breathing. Out of nowhere, he bristled and spoke. "So you're really going to do this?" His voice was calmer than I'd expected, cold almost. "All that school and you want to run some website from your bedroom?" I felt my jaw clench. It's not just a website, it's a platform for small businesses, tools they actually need. It solves a real problem. He turned towards me, a slow, deliberate move, as if the effort itself was offensive. Anna, plenty of people solve problems, but they have degrees, stability. The world doesn't need another one of your digital hobbies. This is not a life. He sounded tired, furious in a way that came from deep inside. My mother tried to smooth things over. "She's only just finished her internship, Carlos, maybe she can." He cut her off. "Doctors save lives, engineers build the world. Your friends' children are out there doing things people respect. Not whatever this is." He gestured at me, at my faded jeans and notebook, at something he couldn't name. A trolley rattled by. My grandmother was sick in a room 3 doors down, and I was sitting here, arguing about my future like everything could wait except this. I should have yelled, that would have been easier. Instead, I kept my voice even, almost flat. "This is what I want, it makes sense, give me time." He scoffed, staring at the ceiling as if for divine patience. "Time for what? To fail? You're throwing away everything. Your teachers said you could do anything. You're going to slink away with nothing." A tightness closed around my chest. Behind my rage was a sharper pain, fear that he was right, that I'd be another in a long line of kids with big ideas who end up back at square one. I stood, scraping the chair back hard enough to draw an annoyed look from a passing nurse. "I'm doing this. I don't want your money, just your respect." My mother touched my hand, gentle and pleading. My father didn't look at me. I left the hospital, neither of them calling me back. The apartment I rented near Campo Pequeno was barely more than a glorified box. The walls were so thin the pipes chattered each time someone, 2 floors up or down, flushed a toilet. My startup was nothing but me, a secondhand laptop and lines of code that felt like prayers, fragile, desperate, never quite right. Outside, my friends' lives moved with a pace as certain as a tram's. Medicine, law, fast-tracked consulting jobs. I saw them sometimes at cafes, the shimmer of glass and metal, talk of bonuses and holidays and abject exhaustion that came with paychecks I had only heard about. Whenever I explained what I was building, automating invoicing and cash flow for little shops who'd been left out of the digital revolution, I saw the same response repeat and ripple through the city's rumor mill. Some told me outright at Sunday lunches, "You'll end up doing someone's taxes or working for the bank, why not get ahead now?" Others, softer voiced, asked me about my project, as if it were a soft-headed child or an embarrassing rash. At night, I wrapped myself in my duvet and worked until the edges of the sky blurred, squinting at error logs and half-built forms, barely able to keep my eyes open. Money vanished faster than I could count. The meager grant from a startup incubator evaporated. My breakfast became coffee and stale toradas. My hands shook as I coded, the caffeine pulsing between my ribs. My hair thinned, split ends sticking out like desperation. Still I built. Each time a tiny shopkeeper in Amadora or Casilhas signed up for a trial, I felt a wild pride. They'd message, nervous and formal, about invoices and accounts receivable, and I'd fix bugs or teach them what a dashboard meant. Sometimes the praise was simple, "Obrigada, Anna," only that, but the sneering never stopped. My cousin Tiago cracked jokes at every family dinner. "Next year you'll be paying us to use your app, eh? Maybe you can do my homework." His laughter spread, first just him, then my aunts, then even my own brother who just graduated in engineering. The adults smiled politely, but I saw the way they exchanged looks. I kept my rage folded tight inside. There were days I screamed into my pillow or walked endlessly by the docks, the Atlantic cold biting my cheeks, unwilling to admit that I was breaking. I learned how to nod and say little. I learned to let their assumptions roll over me, but I kept building. Somewhere in the second year, close to Christmas, I nearly quit. My best friend Marta had left Lisbon for London, something about better chances, bigger pay. She called one night long after midnight, her voice muffled, maybe drunk. "Why are you doing this to yourself? You've done enough, let it go." The line crackled, and I nearly told her everything I was afraid of. That maybe I had wasted years, that maybe I'd never be wanted anywhere again. The words clung like stones in my throat. One grey morning, sitting in my tiny kitchen with a dried-up pastry and cold coffee, an email pinged. I opened it with the practiced indifference of someone used to automated rejections. It was from a major Portuguese accounting firm, one of the giants whose logos hovered over office parks and tram stops all over the city. I read it twice, breath shallow. They wanted to pilot my software with 3 of their small business clients. The deal wasn't spectacular, barely enough to pay my electricity bills for a month, but it was the first real crack in the dam. After that, word seemed to spread by luck more than anything else. By the end of the 3rd year, I'd hired my first teammate, Louise, a scrappy UX designer who'd grown up above a pet food shop in Eau de Velez. He worked out of his living room, and we video called each other every day, rearranging screens and squinting at UI bugs, swapping encouragement for reality checks. I became leaner, sharper. I learned how to pitch to clients across Alentejo and Porto in the mornings, then debug server issues until dusk. I learned to ignore the festering ache whenever I passed my old faculty building and saw students pour out, jubilant and sure. Money trickled in, then suddenly it didn't trickle, it surged. A small German investor wrote, curious about our retention numbers. Then a group from Barcelona signed on for a white label version. Louise and I moved from calls to an actual workspace near the river, the walls covered in post-its and coffee stains. None of this erased the bruises I still felt from family dinners, from the old wounds of seeing my parents' faces, locked and disappointed. 5 years to the day since that hospital corridor, the day my grandmother died, the day my father last called me a failure, I stood outside the same hospital, in a car 2 times newer than anything I'd grown up with, unable to will my hand to knock on the window. I'd come home for my niece Sophia's birthday. Enough time had passed that I could pass for respectable, maybe even admirable at family gatherings. In the papers, my face appeared sometimes under cheerful headlines about Lisbon's sass wonderkid. I always laughed at that. If they knew how many nights I'd stared at my bank account with utter panic, they'd strike wonder and leave only lucky. Still, the past had a way of lingering in the corners. Most of my family hadn't forgiven my stubbornness, though now they praised my determination with the same tone once reserved for cautionary tailies. Inside the hospital, the smells and sounds were mostly the same: industrial soap, the distant beep of machines, the dark shine of imitation wood paneling. My father was there again, standing just below a wall-mounted clock, greyer and somehow smaller but still possessed of a presence that filled halls. "Papa," I began, almost tentative. He turned, arms crossed. "You're here." We walked side by side, the silence limping along behind us. At the elevator, he pressed the button but said nothing for a long time. I glanced sideways and caught his profile, hard lines and tired eyes. "You're presenting at Sophia's ceremony next week?" he finally asked. "Yes, the school wanted someone entrepreneurial." The word tasted strange, something I'd never been called in this family before. He nodded, no smile. "People talk about you now." I didn't reply. We waited in silence, the world narrowing into the humming space around us. The school was old, tile and stone, perched on a hill where stray cats sharpened their claws on cracked balustrades. As I walked in, the city pressed in through open windows, the salt tang from the river, the grind of trolley wheels, the hum of children's voices. Inside the auditorium, it was all awkward chatter and folding chairs. My mother sat up front, her face drawn and careful, as if she wasn't sure how to behave now that my name returned applause instead of sighs. My cousin Tiago lurked at the back, suit 2 sizes too flashy, his arms crossed. The ceremony dragged with the slow inevitability of ritual. Small children recited poetry, teachers spoke in soft, emphatic sentences. Finally, the director called my name. As I walked to the podium, the chatter dimmed. I saw faces I hadn't seen since church picnics, the odd aunt or neighbor looking at me with something between disbelief and interest. Behind it all, my father leaned forward, chin on his fist. I cleared my throat. "When I was Sophia's age," I began, trying to steady my breathing, "I was obsessed with making things work better. I used to take apart radios and my parents told me that was nice. When I built a website to help old shops in Grasa track their orders, people laughed. They said, "Anna, be serious, that's not a life." A ripple of recognition passed through the crowd, nervous, embarrassed for me. But I kept going because deep down I knew I wasn't wrong. Sometimes what seems ridiculous, what gets you mocked or dismissed, is exactly what needs doing. I failed 100 times. I ate more instant noodles than I'll admit. Some nights I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. I paused, finding my mother's eyes soft and shining. "But now," I said, "that little project employs 25 people. It's used by 6,000 small businesses from here to Poland. Some of those are shops that would have closed. Some are new ideas that nobody else would have funded. They're not numbers, they're people, families just like us." The silence was thick. I projected a slide on the screen behind me, real photos of shopkeepers, their smiling faces, a map of our users' locations across Portugal and Europe. I heard Tiago suck in his breath. My brother murmured something. Later he'd swear it was "wow," though I never heard it clearly. I turned back to the crowd. If I'd done what everyone expected, I'd be safe maybe, but not happy. What matters is not how the world sees your dream, but what you do with it, how you fight for it when nobody else will. I finished. There was a pause, so long I wondered if I'd gone too far, if I'd simply embarrassed them once again. Then my niece Sophia jumped from her seat and flung her arms around me. "Tia, Anna, I want to be like you." Her voice, small and fierce, sliced through the quiet. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then steady. I scanned the faces of old doubters, my Uncle Nelson, who'd once berated me for not contributing, my grandfather's oldest friend whose wife had called my mother to ask how she was coping. They were all looking at me as if seeing a new shape, one I hadn't earned by obedience but by sheer, relentless will. Afterwards, family gathered, dazed by the press, the teachers' congratulations, the questions that seemed to fly from every corner. Tiago shook my hand, awkward and forced, bright patches on his cheeks. "Never thought you'd pull it off, Anna," he said softly, awe running through his voice like water over stones. My father walked up, his face unreadable, lips tight. For a moment I thought he'd bless me or perhaps reprimand me for showing off. But instead he put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed. Through the noise his words were barely a whisper. "We were wrong, you did right." He stopped, struggling. "I am proud of you." The words hit me harder than any previous slight, seeping into old wounds, softening something that had gone cold. I stood there while the noise crowded out the doubt, the fear, the loneliness of early mornings and late nights. I could still remember the chill of the old apartment, the stretch of one loaf of bread over a week, the shame of every cousin's mockery. I felt all of it all at once, and then felt it begin to fade. The ceremony ended. I walked down the old stone steps, Sophia skipping by my side, her hand warm in mine. A breeze caught the cherry trees outside, scattering white petals like confetti. Lisbon sprawled below us, sunlit and bright, the river shining beyond rooftops old and stained. For the first time, I saw it not as the city of my struggle, but the place of my stubborn, improbable return. And all around, the voices that had said no were drowned out by the quiet, simple truth that I had made it anyway.